Most are familiar with the Nativity scene. However, who are these three wise men? Who are these Magi? What order do they come from? Who do they represent? And how do they see the scene that is unfolding? To answer who the Magi are, and in tandem speak to the narrative of the magical tradition, we should dedicate some time to understanding not just the Magi, but also Zoroastrianism. We should begin then by mentioning Zoroaster or Zarathustra, depending on who's speaking to him. This was an individual who was believed to live between 1500 and 1200 BC. He had a noetic religious experience that gave a cosmology, that gave a theology, a whole framework of understanding the world. This vision would inspire scripture, books, and all would grow around this vision. But the bona fide religion coming into power, becoming a tradition, starts as early as 600 BC. Now, there is plenty of scholarly debate as to what this early form of Zoroastrianism looked like and how soon it moved into what we might declare as a monotheism. Without diving into the cosmology and all of the intricacy of the story of Zoroastrianism, there is effectively Ahura Mazda, who we could understand translated as God or the beneficent creator. There is also Engremenu, who is the negative aspect that is not equal to God and will ultimately be purged from this world. However, Zoroastrianism is entering a religious spiritual tradition of this area of paganism. There are a number of different deities that it is assimilating into its body. The most notable for historical purposes is Mithras, the sun deity, the god of contracts, who will become the inspiration for Mithraism in Rome much later. From the earliest days, we see ceremonies, offerings given to the mountain, given to the river, these more animistic-like practices of Zoroastrian faith. Still yet, though, the debate comes to its categorization. Is this monotheism if there are still these animistic aspects? Although all these deities serve under Ahura Mazda, are they not thought of as a hentheism or something equivocal to Zeus ruling over the gods of Greece? So, the nature of how this categorization moves forward is a shifty subject. Regardless, though, we are introducing something new with Zoroastrianism, and that is duality or dualism. This beneficent deity and this evil deity, and this choice to embrace one or to be left with the other. This is by no means the only attribute introduced by Zoroastrianism that will become very, let's just say, foreboding or foreshadowing of what is to come. There is the dualism. There is the eschatology, or the introduction of the idea of an end time, the idea of resurrection, the idea of the direct incarnation or embodiment of the Godhead or divinity, which is very much inspired by India, of course, the idea of resurrection, final judgment, a Messiah. All of this would set the framework for the power structures of the future, I hope you can see. But let's talk Magi. Let's talk about specific religious functions. The first thing to get out of the way is that there is debate as to the origins of the Magi. Were the Magi the first disciples of Zoroaster? Were the Magi priests of their own right of the inciting paganism that would ultimately become Zoroastrian priests? Or were they simply a group that had become emboldened within Zoroastrianism? For us, though, we aren't necessarily interested in that. We're interested in seeing what has been retained from the ancient magical tradition. Out of the gates, we see fire veneration, we see fire worship and a kindling of the sacred fire, keeping it clean and tending to it, keeping it going eternally. This fire veneration we can trace all the way back into shamanic history. This still survives with Siberian shamanism to this day. What's especially curious is the integration of spirit travel or astral projection or remote viewing. This is an homage to the shamanic journey. The priests would have methods for moving their spirit into other realms of being. While this can be done in a sober fashion, there is also the assistance of plant medicine, fortified wine, the homa, all manner of ritualistic herbology in order to solicit sacred spaces are utilized. The Magi orchestrate all manner of public ceremony. Again, whether it was to acknowledge the mountain or the river, or more mundanely speaking, to give a wedding ceremony or burial rites, any ceremony done would be the personal specialty of the Magi. They are additionally known as great mesmerizers. They have memorized the ancient religious hymns. They are keen astrological observers. They interpret dreams. They advise the king. So here we see that role once again played of being at the top of the caste system, having the ear of the highest ruler. So the only thing missing here, as a distinction from Mesopotamian magic, would be the specific mention of exorcism. In all of the studies that I've taken towards this, I have not found any allusions to exorcism via the Magi. Another distinction is the aforementioned spirit travel, or that astral projection practicing. That was not found in Mesopotamian society. So we do see some alteration here, but it does seem that the main body of the magical tradition has been allowed its continuity. So I'm saying the word Magi, and this is the root of the term magic. The Greeks would say magos, and this magus in the old Persian would be this very specific role that I'm carving out here today. This magical practitioner, this inheritor of the advancing of the magical tradition. The Magi here are going to be a nexus point, a collection of all of this ancient knowledge, moving from the shamanic, moving from Mesopotamia, and in particular in Medea, or what we would today call Iran, they are cherished. They are at their supreme. There are ancillary Magi in Babylon that are thought of as charlatans. So we are discussing specifically the Median Magi. And it should be mentioned, it should be known, that the Magi have mastered the art of prophecy. They listen to the oracles and their prophetic ecstasis. They follow the stars. They are very mindful of meteorological events, comets, constellations, so forth. In addition, there is this mystic means towards prognosis, this utilization of the shamanic journey in order to learn of what is to come or of what is, much in the same way as the black budget projects to remote view in the modern day. But let's hash out the faith here a bit more. The ultimate goal of the world is for goodness, Ahura Mazda, to reclaim it, that evil will be banished. But in the meantime, we, as playing a part in this, must help facilitate that return. If we all become better, if we all become spiritually matured, then we are bringing the ground for this eschatology. So then it is very important that we help further this mission. The Yazatas, or what would later be translated as angels, have a part to play in this, and our veneration, our honoring of them is important accordingly. And the astrology as well is very important. All of these means towards magic are a way to help further the mission of this world's becoming, you see. So these religious practices, this astral projecting, this herbology, this dream analysis, all of this is in seeking the wonderment and fulfillment of that which is provided via Ahura Mazda. We're traveling into these soupy waters of magic, and we're trusting our direction, our intention towards that approach. We must be vigilant. We have to watch for the signs, and we have to have the knowledge of being able to interpret the signs given directly from divinity. So, Zoroastrians, and by extension the Magi, would be very attentive to certain astrological conjunctions in the sky, would be very attentive to the North Star, being that they believed that it was a embodiment, vessel of Ahura Mazda, like the eye of Horus, looking down, watching as a beneficent reminder that the supreme deity is overlooking, is being watchful, and is there, effectively. The North Star at its podium, at its post, is that very icon. But it's very interesting to contrast these arrangements. What I mean is the North Star acting as the watcher for Ahura Mazda, further out, farther away, a greater metaphysical primordial essence, creator, you see. Then you have Mithras, who embodies the sun. Now, typically, the greatest deity in a pantheon would be the sun. Like Shamash for the Mesopotamians, this sun would watch over everything. So it's curious to have these two different podiums and how they are arranged. They both are watchers over. They both have this beneficent quality, but one is closer and one is further. And even though Ahura Mazda's watcher is further, it is even more omnipotent, you see. So there's a poetry in this projection of the cosmology, of the schema into the cosmos. Again, it's no accident that the planets are named after deities, these watchers, these wanderers in the sky that are playing a crucial role in the observation of the world. So thus, it is a direct message from that which is above, what is seen in the sky. The comets, the conjunctions, all these things are a speaking. They're a sign that is being given to mankind to help guide it. These wanderers are watching, and they are offering signs to help us do the thing, to help us further the spiritual maturation, the becoming of this world. So, provided this, the Magi, or even you, if you lived in this schema, would you not give everything to advancing your knowledge of it, to furthering your understanding of it. If it served a religious, metaphysical motivation. And so the advancement of reading these signs, of understanding astronomy, astrology, and how these things relate to this world, the herbology, the way we go about ceremonies, our architecture, all of this would be of supreme importance. Given that there is a divine plan, given that there is an eschatos, a final event, we must do our part to maintain cosmic harmony towards that goal, to embody the motivations of that which is good, to bring that closer to the earth, closer to manifestation. So the notability of these magi, these outstanding mesmerizers, would carry far beyond Medea. Given certain shiftings of the foothold of Zoroastrianism in the area, you see a number of magi exodus to the west, and there they will inspire Mithraism, which will become the secret society of the military, overruling the local religions of the area, and certainly providing the grounds for monotheism in Rome. By extension, you have the inspiration of the word magus with the Greeks. And the magus in their language will become the soothsayer or magician, or one who deals with, say, paranormal arts, shamanic ritual. But here, it's important to note, no matter where the influence of the Magi moves, this distinction of how to relate with the spiritual world is changed by them. And the change is completely a matter of duality. Now there are good spirits and bad spirits. There are not mixed or ambiguous or gray. There is the good and the bad. We see this as a stark contrast to the Mesopotamian practitioners, their ancestors. This distinction between both certainly serves the visions of Zoroaster, or how the religion has formed through time, but this is a very uncharacteristic way, historically speaking, of approaching spiritual matters. Just as an easy and quick contrast, you can say, hey, Zeus is obviously a great guy, when in fact a lot of what Zeus did is not great. Or you say, hey, Hades is clearly the evil one, when in fact Hades is very much not that in their mythic understanding, in the story, in the lore of it all. So this is the very beginning, the very seed of casting this dualistic net across different mythologies of the world. Now, I know this is relatively soupy waters, that there are a lot of players politically in this frame of history, a lot of different empires, changes, religious groups to entertain. For instance, what about the Egyptians' role in magic? And yes, that's a great question, but our mission in this session specifically is the history of ideas following the Magi and their role in the magical tradition into the Christian tradition. So let's start diving into that a bit more. So, in the Old Testament, in the book of Jeremiah, there's a mention of a chief magus. It is conventionally interpreted that this chief magus inspired or had tutelage over Daniel and his noetic ecstasis, his dream vision. And might we then make the leap and say, at the very least, that Ezekiel's vision was inspired by the arcane knowledge and the vernacular, the symbolism of the Magi? It should be a reflection that the Bible in large shines a fairly good light on the Magi. And yes, we will be talking about the wise men. And this is curious because of what the Magi do. What the Magi do will ultimately become a work of charlatans or hedonism or heresy. Still yet, whether in the Old Testament or the New, the Magi are exempt of this sort of approach, which is very curious, don't you think? Now, the Zoroastrians have long followed oracles, and they have had their own prophecies at large, especially the Mithridates. One of these prophecies is of a virgin birth, is of the direct incarnation of Mithras on earth. So, if that were to be true, and we as Magi take this very seriously, we would be looking out for the conjunction or the sign. We would be vigilant and hypothesize what exact astronomical, astrological circumstances would have to align, what symbolic values of a specific time would it take for this incarnation of divinity to be brought up in, with all of our precise understanding where, how, by what circumstance. And we should ask ourselves too, what would that then mean? If this prophecy is true, how would we interpret that prophecy? Would this be the beginning of the eschatos? Would this be a herald of better times to come, the bringing of a new age? Perhaps the age of Pisces as a good reference? What would that mean is a great reflection for us at this point. So here it is, the Star of Bethlehem. And as to what that is exactly has a certain variance of interpretation. This Star of Bethlehem is a specific conjunction. Is this Star of Bethlehem the North Star, that of Ahura Mazda? You see? And then accordingly, that this child is found. This child is born. This is the story. So how do the Magi interpret this nativity? They have been looking out for this prophecy. And the child is found. Now, this might be heresy for me to say, but just as an entertaining thought. If we are looking out for something and we project a lot of meaning into that, and we see a trigger, we see something, a sign that is very significant, and then we happen across a child that fits all of these circumstances that we've invented, is that child the thing? I hope you see what I'm asking here. Or do we make that child the thing? Of course, in the conventional approach, this is irrevocably an incarnation of divinity, no question. But what I'm asking is this level of potential confirmation bias as an entertaining thought. But even to step outside of that, this child would represent the embodiment of Mithras, or a vessel of Ahura Mazda. And so their reverence, their bowing, their veneration is in accordance to their belief, what they've been seeking and what they've found. So politically, this is really fascinating because it is bringing in Ahura Mazda, or the interpretation of Ahura Mazda, and making it Yahweh, making it El, making it the Abrahamic deity. And so there's this kind of conversion happening here. There's a bringing them into the fold, you see, integrating the very well-established power of the Magi, the belief of the Magi, and bringing them into this Christian story. I hope you can see how truly complex this is, because the prophecy was earnestly there. and it was brought in? Anyway, this is a great concrescence of prophecies littered throughout the Old Testament as well. This is a coming of the new age, and this is a king. This is a king being born on earth, and this deserves some context. A king was historically interpreted as divinity incarnate. Thus, the pharaoh is a direct tie to the deity. So, this king has the mana, or has the innate power to change the story of the world, to further it. And so this very specific conjunction, bringing about a very significant person, is the language of the ancient past. You weren't just a king in the sense that you inherited the role. You were a priest king, a philosopher king, an ordained king, given that birthright through divinity, through dream, or through prophecy. So a king is, at the very least, a de facto demigod. And so what are the gifts that you bring on this very special occasion, in this birthing of a new king that will bring the new age unto this world? And the gifts are, as many of us know, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, myrrh is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, it was used to make the balm for burial. This could be a symbolic reference or a foreshadowing of the atonement of Jesus later on in the story, his death. Or we can interpret it a different way, and that is that myrrh was reserved for anointing ointments for kings. Either way, we're carrying a very different type of significance. And mind you, we're paying attention to some herbology here, some sacred herbology. I'm just saying. Frankincense, though, is much more straightforward. This is a sacerdotal incense. This is reserved for ceremonies, for the priesthood, and this would only be had by someone of the priest class. So this is an homage to his holiness. And lastly comes gold. And in a very straightforward way that I don't get along with personally, gold is simply an homage to the king status once more. And I don't get along with this because of the context that we've built here. Gold, historically, is emblematic of the sun. Literally, the sun. And we have here prophecies of Mithras from the Mithridates. And Mithras is the sun. And so, as a direct incarnation by this prophecy, that is Mithras. And accordingly, we bring gold. Now, that's just my take on the matter. But of course, this has been interpreted in the former way as well. But to wrap up the historical narrative here, Mithraism will be swallowed up by Christianity in Rome, and Zoroastrianism will ultimately be supplanted by Islam. Zoroastrianism survived and is still practiced to this day. But let's do some refreshers for the purposes of our investigations in this session. The Magi uniquely consolidated and furthered the magical tradition in ways that we have never seen it since. This use of astrology, herbology, soliciting mystical experiences, ceremony, dream interpretation, remote viewing, astral projection, all of this is uniquely akin to the role of a shaman, the many roles of a shaman. This isn't a far stone's throw away. As a quick overview and a foreshadowing of what is to come in the narrative of the magical tradition, the Magi have consolidated all of this knowledge and they're further advancing it, but they're still operating in this priest-class kind of way, advisor to rulers, bureaucracy, somewhat of that is still there. Here we have Zoroastrianism. Whether they were there before Zoroastrianism or whether they were plainly representatives of it, doesn't necessarily matter. Zoroastrianism and their inspiration of Mithraism will ultimately become the grounds for Christianity's growth in the future. But what's really fascinating and what we really have to pay attention to here is this wedge. This wedge is the empowerment and institutionalization of Christianity. We will then start to separate the various aspects of magic yet again. These separations will become what is appropriate magical behavior underneath the religious institutionalization of Christianity, and everything else that isn't ordained, will become the dark arts. And now magic will have its own wing of interpretation, distinct from the religious realm of things. I hope you can see. So our future of the course in this way, our future of discussing the magical tradition, is everything that happens after this wedge, and maybe even why this wedge came to be. So in this way, the Magi are the last call of the magical tradition being honored in full. The Spiritual Studies course is an effort towards free public education on matters of spirituality, religion, and comparative mythology. It seeks to offer these things in a sober and honoring fashion. Accordingly, any patronage or publicity or sharing of the course is greatly appreciated. It is my earnest desire to be able to do this full time and to give myself to it openly. Accordingly, there is thanks to be given to those that have been among the first to help this initiative. Those being the Satyr Witch, Nora, Lucy, the Irrational Sage, Scorson, Craig Mitchell, Kristen, and quote, someone. With that said, stay curious and keep seeking.